Welcome back. New Yorkers headed to the polls for today's primary elections to choose their candidates for all 26 congressional district races. On the gubernatorial side, Republican Bruce Blakeman and incumbent Democrat Governor Kathy Hochul both entering unopposed. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani looking to test his political clout and whether voters will adhere to his socialist ideals, leading to some infighting within the party. Mamdani held a rally with Senator Bernie Sanders last week, where he said the Democrat Party needs to change their old way of thinking. Joining us now is New York Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis. Congresswoman, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. So, first of all, how many seats do the Democrats need to gain to take the majority? Do you expect that to happen? And what about these Mamdani-endorsed candidates? Do they stand a chance?
Well, you know, the number of our majority changes every day. I think it's about 4 right now that they would need to take in November.
In the House?
I think that of the House, yes.
Yeah. And what about the Senate?
And I think in the Senate, you have 4 as well. You have, it's 53, right? So it's interesting to see how this will all play out. I believe, quite frankly, that you're going to see some of these crazy left-wing candidates get elected today in New York City. I hope I'm wrong. Not that it really matters. They all vote the same way at the end of the day, right? The incumbents who are there, the Democrats, they have supported open borders. They voted for the largest massive tax increase. They voted against that big, beautiful bill with all those tax benefits for the middle class. And, you know, at the end of the day, they also voted to defund our law enforcement. So what you're really going to get here, perhaps the biggest difference will be that you'll get people who are actually true blue socialists, people who really do want to see our country looking more like Venezuela. Now, obviously, we need to keep the majority to ensure that doesn't happen. And just to give you an example, the candidate who's running against Congressman Adriano Espaillat, she has said she wants to abolish police, prisons, borders. She doesn't even think we should have a defense budget. I mean, it's really ludicrous and wacky. But that's the Democrat Party today, right? It's not your grandfather's party. Look what they did in New Jersey. They actually nominated a guy who is the defense witness for the blind sheik who was then convicted in the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. This is a Democrat Party that is sympathizing more with socialists, communists, and terrorists than the middle-class Americans that the Democrats used to be for back in the days of JFK and even Bill Clinton.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have to ask the question, Liz. I'm with Liz Peek this morning and Mitch Rochelle, Congresswoman, and we have to ask the question, what does all of this say about the direction of the Democrat Party, Liz?
Yeah, and Nicole, I think one thing that just horrifies all of us is this sort of institutionalized anti-Semitism and anti-Israel posturing on the part of these people. That's really what's at issue and what's on the line in a lot of these primary votes. People like Dan Goldman, who supports Israel, being confronted by people who don't. What do you make of that? How did we get here?
Yeah, look, I think it's very unfortunate what we're seeing. It is true anti-Semitism that we're seeing displayed by members in the House of Representatives. I mean, Ilhan Omar, who's there now, Rashida Tlaib and others, they have been clear in their positions. Zohran Mamdani supports the BDS movement. He is somebody who wants to boycott anything that has to do with Israel. He said he would arrest Netanyahu if he came to New York City. These are very extreme positions when you see people who are running for office who are literally at rallies where they're flying Hamas or Hezbollah flags. I mean, this is insane. And these people are going to get elected to Congress and have access to intelligence. I mean, would a Speaker Hakeem Jeffries put them on the Intelligence Committee and allow them to have all this important information? We saw that they did nothing when we found Eric Swalwell was having an affair with a Chinese spy. Nancy Pelosi allowed him to remain on the Intelligence Committee. So this is very critical. It is very important that voters see what's happening here and that they vote accordingly. And the best way, by the way, to ensure that these people don't have control is to vote Republican. Make sure we retain the House of Representatives.
What is the motive here, Congresswoman? I mean, when you consider the fact that these are such backward policies, do they really believe in this stuff, or are they just trying to hold on to their grip on power?
Well, I think these Democrat socialists that are running truly do believe this stuff. They are anti-capitalist. They want to see our country look like Venezuela. They think that is the path forward, which is ludicrous when you see all the Venezuelans fleeing Venezuela to escape socialism. Now, the incumbent Democrats, I think that they've moved more and more to the left for self-preservation. They don't believe in this stuff. They're just afraid of their primary to the left. And when I speak to some of those Democrats, I ask them, how could you vote for this? How could you vote for that?
Right.
They said, well, because I have a primary. And look, when Andrew Cuomo did not stand up against this infringement that was coming and being elected in the state legislature, that's when it all spiraled. Not standing up against this radical left, allowing them to take state legislative seats. What happened? This was a monster that grew, and they ate Andrew Cuomo alive.
Right.
That's what happened here, and they probably will eat some more of these incumbents alive today. That is why these more mainstream, I don't even want to call them mainstream because their voting record stinks, but these incumbent Democrats, they should have stood up against the radical left instead of placating them and moving more and more to the left to try to satisfy a radical fringe base.
But, I mean, the New York legislature is so entrenched. I was having this conversation with Governor Ron DeSantis the other day, and he said, look, it's so difficult to change the thinking in New York because of that New York state legislature that you wouldn't be able to do in New York what he's doing in Florida. He's got a smaller budget with more people than New York. And then there's the border.
That's right.
And President Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, said that New York City was about to see, quote, the largest deployment of ICE officers you've ever seen. A response to Kathy Hochul's extensive legislative package, which partially prevents state and local law enforcement from engaging with federal agents. It bans the feds from using state and local facilities for immigration enforcement. And Mayor Mamdani said this about the city's sanctuary city policies yesterday. Watch.
I'm proud of our sanctuary city status. It is a status that we have had in this city for decades. It's also a status that, when there is the conviction of more than 170 serious crimes, does allow for coordination with the federal government on that. We are not going to allow this city to become the civil immigration enforcement arm of a federal government that is hell-bent on a deportation regime that would rip families apart across this city.
Well, I mean, he's proud of it, Congressman. You recently held a press conference on the impact of New York sanctuary city laws and the need to pass the Save America Act. We just did a whole story about this illegal who was arrested because he was eligible to vote in local, state, and federal elections.
Well, first of all, the mayor is lying. They do not cooperate for the most heinous crimes. What he said there is actually untrue. In fact, when I did my press conference the other day, we unveiled the crimes that ICE arrested individuals for with zero help from the city or the state. People who were convicted of murder, of vehicular manslaughter, of robbery, rape, child molestation, the worst of the worst.
Wow.
These people oftentimes had multiple arrests and were released back onto our streets, just like R-N.Y's murderer, who was arrested in New York but released back onto the street and went on to kill Laken Riley. Richard Williams, the 83-year-old veteran, shoved on the subway track and killed by an illegal immigrant who, by the way, the taxpayers were paying to house in a shelter here in New York. That guy had 15 prior arrests, and he was still on the street. So the city does not cooperate, even when the individuals are convicted of some of those most heinous crimes. So the mayor is simply not being honest with New Yorkers.
Yeah.
And I have to call him out on that. But what I'll say is that, look, ICE is trying to do a job. They're trying to remove people from our streets. If the city and the state are not going to cooperate, it actually makes it less safe for everyone, because now those officers have to go out in the street and find those individuals.
Yeah.
So I introduced a bill, by the way, when they're doing their job, when any federal law enforcement officers doing their job, there needs to be a 15-foot buffer. People have their right to protest, but they can't agitate and get in the way of law enforcement trying to do their job.
Well, did you just see? We just saw video of Mamdani getting in their faces. I mean, he is a real activist. Mamdani, I mean, the mayor was, look at this. Look at how he's getting in their faces here. And this is just in March of last year. Look, you mentioned the Save America Act, Congresswoman. Both chambers of Congress back in session today. You've got a week to go before the August recess. I know there's been talk about a third reconciliation package, but, I mean, you had trouble getting the second one across the finish line because Democrats tried to stop you. Is there any shot for the Save America Act anywhere, attaching it to FISA, or is there a shot of a third reconciliation package?
Well, I think if there's a shot, I think it needs to go through the reconciliation package if there's a way to do that. Because if we tie it to grants to states to help implement it, it's possible that we can do it in reconciliation. I would be hesitant to tie it to FISA. I know the president has called for that, but FISA is such a critical anti-terrorism tool. It is so important that that is online as soon as possible. I mean, this is a tool that has stopped terror plots in the past, allows surveillance of foreign nationals outside of the United States. And with all the events that we have for July 4th, the 250th anniversary, right now the World Cup is taking place. You also have the 25th anniversary of 9/11. I think we need to pass a clean FISA extension. There were already 60 reforms that were placed the last time it was extended a couple of years ago. And if we need to make a few other changes to get members on board, let's do it. But that needs to get done. In a post-9/11 world, I'm very concerned as a New Yorker to keep that offline any longer.
Understood. Congresswoman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Nicole Malliotakis in New York. We'll be right back.